So, so I'm about 3 years old, and my mom and dad are having a dinner party. My brother Derek, he's a little older than me, he and I are doing hot laps around the place. We're kind of those folks at a dinner party, the little kids, they think they're entertaining to the guests, but really they're just annoying to the guests. And we get to that moment in the evening where my dad billows from the party room to us, "Boys, if you're not in your beds with the lights off in 2 minutes, there will be trouble." To which we reply with more hot laps. Moments later, the inevitable happens. We hear the creaking floorboards. We hear the wooden palm and wood hitting each other. And a moment later, we are convinced we're in trouble. We immediately make eye contact with each other. We don't say a word. And we split in other directions, which I know you're already thinking, very advanced thinking for a 3-year-old. I agree. I turn around, cut right, burn up the stairs, cut right again, flick the switch, dive for the cool side of the pillow, and I'm giggling underneath the sheets while I'm listening to my brother get spanked. Oh, it gets better. And all I can think of is how unintelligent my older brother is. You see, I cut right, he cuts left, and here's the thing, just don't cut left. And he runs right into my dad. And I'm sitting here under the sheets giggling, thinking, I got away scot-free. Except I didn't. You see, the next day on his way to work, my dad was killed in a car accident. And to an adult mind, this won't make a lot of sense to you, but to a 3-year-old's mind, there's false correlations that can happen. And in my situation, for many, many years, I was under the belief that my dad left, that my dad died, because I didn't go to bed on time. Add to that, I found out years later, not only did my dad die when I was 3, but my dad's dad died when my dad was 3. So I was a part of this legacy of death. Now, good news, I have 4 kids. My youngest is 7. But this still left me with a dilemma. How does a guy who doesn't have a dad for most of his life, whose dad didn't have a dad for most of his life, figure out how to be a dad? Fast forward 2 decades. I'm just graduating from Biola. My best friend is gonna go nameless because he's now a professor at this fine institution, and he decides to throw me a bachelor party because I'm about to get married. And he's gonna stay nameless because I wanna make sure he doesn't get in any trouble. So we decide that, or he decides, him and a bunch of my buddies are gonna throw this party, and the revelry happens, that part is edited out. We're gonna go straight to the serious part of the evening when he turns to me and says, okay, you need to go upstairs and put on this uniform. I'm at this guy's house, there's about 15 of us, they know me pretty well. I'm like, okay. I look at the uniform, it's a white t-shirt and a white pair of boxer shorts. And I'm thinking it's weird too, you're not alone, okay? So I go upstairs, I put this on, and I come down, and the guys are all somber, and they ask me to come to the center of the room, and again, about 15 of them. I stand in the middle, and they're all standing around me, and they start telling me what my mom and dad might have said to me when I was first born. Things like, he's so precious, and he's so full of potential, and he's strong. And then they started handing me artifacts, like literally physical eggs to symbolize innocence, and a physical sword to symbolize my strength. And then they held me up above their heads like I'm at a rock concert and took me outside. I remember it was freaking freezing. And we go outside, and I'm in boxer shorts. And they put me down, and it was just this amazing experience. And then they started asking me questions. They said, well, what happened next? What happened next? And I was a little evasive. I didn't know where they were going, and I just kept saying, I don't remember. It's a long time ago. And they said, we think you remember. What happened next? And then I said, well, I think that's when my dad died. And what I didn't know was there was 2 of my buddies who actually snuck behind me when I wasn't looking, and they had picked up a 5-gallon bucket of ice water that they had stored ahead of time. And the moment I said the words, I think that's when my dad died, they pounded me from behind with the ice water. And I was immediately brought back to my 3-year-old reality, undone. They crushed the eggs on my chest, they poured ash on my head, they ripped the sword out of my hand, and they put me in a position where I had to answer one single question. One question. I needed to go find my father. So, long story short, because I've run out of time already, this is hard, you guys. Last story, very short. About 3 years ago, I'm at this training, the spiritual retreat thing, and the facilitator of the training says, I want you to imagine your dad is in the room and talk to your dad out loud what you wish you would have this person say to you. And everyone in the room actually had a dad who was alive, so it was easy for them, but I went for it anyways. And I found myself saying things like, Dad, I just want you to tell me that it's gonna be okay. I want you to tell me that you love me. I want you to tell me that you're with me. And then, no kidding, you're not gonna believe it, I actually heard God speak. And what God said to me in real words, and I know it was him because it was so darn clever, he says to me, you are going to hear the words that you crave in your heart, and you're gonna be surprised where they come from because they're gonna come out of your own mouth to your own children. Because in my world, all of a sudden, in an instant, the word with became the kind of word that will never leave me. The kind of word that will never leave me. Thank you.
So I'm a church admin, and I decide who's going to do what on a short-term mission to Virginia Beach. So what I decide is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go to the prison, and I'm not going to do any street witnessing. Never say that to God. He giggles when you make plans. He changes them. So what happens is we go to a place called the Fire Escape in Virginia Beach, surrounded by a whole bunch of stuff that none of you have ever been to, bars, X-rated video stores, and clubs. But there's this place called the Fire Escape. In this place, there's someone standing outside inviting people to escape the fire. And that fire, you know what it is. So there I am, the guy that doesn't want to do it, standing outside, trying to get people to go in. First guy comes by, it's pretty good, passing him out, it can't be that hard. Second guy, I decide to make sure that he goes in. We're talking, I'm following, we're talking, I'm following him. Actually, I'm chasing him. He ends up saying, you're not gonna chase me anymore. I said, why not? Look where we are. I looked up, it was one of those places. I said, I guess you're right, I'm not going in. As I walked back, feeling defeated, I got to this part where there was a little alley. As I got to the alley, something that you know about, the Holy Spirit, had me look down the alley. As I looked down the alley, there was a silhouette figure. I went down the alley, not having any common sense at all, and reached down and saw a 14-year-old boy who I was gonna find out that had just run away. As I got to him, I got him up to the fire escape, we got him some sodas, some popcorn. He listened to the message, and he wanted to receive Christ. Oh, the third thing I didn't want to do was ever have to pray with anybody. Because what do you say? What do you tell them? What do you do? So the guy said, you brought him here, you're gonna lead him in the sinner's prayer. So I did that. Real obedient guy. So the pastor comes, we take him to a place where they're gonna try and connect him with his parents. They go in, I stay out in the truck. Back then you could sit in the back of a truck, no seat belts. And we find out a bunch of different things. Pastor comes out, says they've connected him, and he starts to tell me a couple of things about this little connection that I had. He said, first of all, Ed, you found him before one of four things could happen. He could have been drugged. He could have been molested. He could have been taken for prostitution, or he could have been killed. As we sat in the back of the truck and we went home, I thought of my 14-year-old son, who was here in Whittier while I was off. And I just thanked the Lord that he was protected. I thank the Lord that he's given me a heart for my kids that is just amazing. You know, I've always wanted to talk to you guys. I'm out in the warehouse, way over there. I receive all your packages. And I want to challenge you. I really do want to challenge you. When we were in Virginia Beach, another thing happened I didn't want to do. The mission guy didn't show up. He was doing some stuff at the fire escape, so he was tired. So I had to do the missions part of the Vacation Bible School. And somehow the Lord gave me this little vision to share with these kids. We were talking about going to Russia, going to China, going to Indonesia, going to everywhere else. And I told them, I said, stand on one foot. Let's see if I can do this. I said, you're on the mission field, where your mom, your dad, your neighbors, your brothers, your sisters are there, and they may not know Christ. So my challenge to you is this. You're on the mission field today. You're in the room where someone needs the Lord, where someone needs that spiritual hug, where someone needs that encouragement, where someone needs whatever it is. So don't be that guy that didn't want to do it, because God, he giggles, and then he puts you out there in front of those things. Thank you.
And so it was just last night, I was on a plane from Dallas to LA thinking about StorySlam and the story I was going to tell you about my last night with my father 16 years ago. And next to me, I was in seat 9D, but in seats 9E and F, there was a father and a son. I say was because they were one. I don't say there were a father and son because they weren't two. Huddled together, this father and this teenage boy were telling stories and talking about the size of the plane, and the father was telling him how things go together and how the plane flies at certain speeds. And as he was telling his son those stories, I missed my dad. And I thought about how sweet it was when I was just a little boy and he would tuck me in at night. And I'd say, Dad, tell me a story when you were little. And he'd tell me about being raised on that Canadian farm and the cows that they had. He'd tell me the story about his brother Douglas, who was killed in a plane crash in World War II, who crashed into the mountains. Sometimes when we didn't have enough time to tell a story, he'd just say, I'll tell you a story about old Mother Maury, and now my story's begun. I'll tell you another about her brother, and now my story's done. And I always wanted more. I sat next to that father and son on that plane last night, and I thought about that. I thought about when my father would take me on these business trips when I was but a teenager, and we'd go to cities like Cheyenne and Denver and Oklahoma City and Chicago. And he'd pay for my way. We didn't make a whole lot of money, so we kind of ate on the cheap and stayed in, budget hotels along the way, but those were the times together. Or when I was driving off to college and he was saying goodbye to me, and he cried as he said goodbye. And I think half of the reason why he was crying was because he was afraid of what might happen to his boy on that 1,500-mile car ride from Auburn, Massachusetts to Springfield, Missouri. And maybe half was because I knew he was going to miss me and he liked to be around me. And so it was on January the 10th, 1998. At our home, we got a call from the hospice center, the place where he was sent to die. And they said that his breathing is short, his heartbeat is erratic, and his vitals are failing. And so I got in the car with my mother and my sister Bonnie, and we drove down to his bedside, and we stood around him. And my sister Bonnie kissed him. My mother released him, and I stayed with him. They went back home, and I pulled out that chair that unfolded into a bed, and I lied by his side. And I held his hand like he used to hold mine. His hand was limp, but it wasn't lifeless. And nurses were coming and going, and occasionally he let out this death groan that came from deep within his soul. And I could feel in his fingers that the tips were getting a little bit cool, and his hands were getting a little bit cool. And I realized that that heart of his, as big as the prairies of Canada, wasn't beating as it should, and it was about to fail. So I'd wake up on and off throughout the night. And when the morning came, I listened for him to breathe, and I couldn't hear anything. And so I put my ear up against his mouth that was half open, his lips curled around his teeth. And there was no noise, so I went and got the nurse. And these nurses came in, these nurses that he had loved and that he had blessed, all in the name of Jesus. And they looked at his body and they said, God bless him. And they folded the sheets around his body and tucked him in. And until my sister came, I was there for an hour or so alone with the body of my father. He used to say there is no sting of death for those whose hope is in Christ, but I didn't really believe it that morning. And sometimes, even today, I still feel that sting. But wouldn't you know, as I sat on that plane last night after I had composed all of my thoughts and put them down in writing, I turned and looked at the father next to me, sitting there beside his son with his arm around him. And the father had his iPad open just last night. And I looked at what his iPad said, what he was reading. And he was reading from Romans 8. But if Christ is in you, that even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. That's what he was reading last night. Imagine that. No, really, imagine that.
Like most of us, I've had my fair share of awkward conversations in life. Breaking up with a girlfriend, or more likely in my case, having a girlfriend break up with me. It's true. Or, an awkward, horribly, a job interview that goes horribly wrong, or just meeting someone that you want to make an impression on and it goes completely bonkers. But if I look over the course of my life and I look back at probably the most awkward conversation I've ever had, it probably would be the day that I introduced myself at age 28 to my own father. By the way, we haven't planned these talks, but anyways. But yeah, I mean, there's books on like how to meet someone from the opposite sex. There's books on how to do a good job interview. But there's not many books on that topic. I mean, my only reference point, my only model was really Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. And in that instance, someone lost a hand, and I didn't want it to go that way. So I figured, I got to go in there blind. I got to kind of figure out how to do this on my own. And I remember standing in the courtyard of this apartment complex in North County, San Diego, and looking up at an apartment which I knew was his. And my wife and my kids had gone out of town for the weekend to kind of give me some space to do this thing. It had been, really, in all honesty, about 20 years in the making. When I was 8 years old, I found out exactly why my dad wasn't around. No one had talked about it before then, and I found out that my dad was a pastor of a church in LA. He was married, he had 6 kids, and my mom was a younger woman at the church. One thing led to another. Their relationship entered into kind of a different phase, and it evolved into an intimate relationship, and that's where I came from. Well, while my mom was still pregnant with me, the revelation came out to the church, and the church kind of collapsed, and my dad decided to go back with his wife and with his kids. And my mom moved in with me, at that point born, and with my grandma and my grandpa. And that's kind of how I grew up. And that's the reason why he wasn't around, and that's the reason why I hadn't seen him all this time. So I stood there, looking up at this door, and I knew I had to go. I tried for 10 years at that point. When I graduated from high school, I began to search for him. I looked for him, really using any means I had, the internet, private detectives, no luck. And finally, here I was, 2 kids, a wife, 28 years old, and I finally found out where he was, really only 20 minutes away from where I was living at the time. And I found him at this apartment complex, and I stepped up towards the door, and I knocked 3 times. And a man came to the door, and probably wondering what this young kid was doing at his door on a Saturday afternoon, he said, "Hi, what can I do for you?" I said, "Hi, are you George Adams?" Just gotta confirm things, right? And he said, yes I am. And he had a phone in his hand, kind of in a hurry, I guess. And I said, again, no script for this kind of conversation, people. I said, I'm Aaron Adams. And he's looking a little bit confused, but he said, "What can I do for you, Aaron?" I said, "Well, do you know Pat Manning?" And he said, a little bit more recognition on his face, yes, I do. I knew her." And I said, "Well, she's my mom. And I think that makes you my dad." And again, you can say like, "Hey, what's your major? What's your sign?" But there's no way to ease into that conversation. There's no line. It just kind of like, "You're my dad." And he looked back at me and looked down at his cell phone. Not his cell phone, it was a house phone at this point. Looked down at his house phone, looked back up at me, looked down at the phone. He said, "Oh, well, Aaron, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm on a long-distance phone call, and maybe we can catch up sometime. Can you leave me your phone number?" And I had a letter that I was hoping to leave there in case he wasn't there. And the letter, I was able to ask him to kind of open the door a little bit, the screen door, and I slid the letter to him and snuck a handshake in as well. And the letter told him my email address, my phone number, and it also had a picture of my wife and my kids and I, and it also told him that God had taken care of me. It told him that I had forgiven him and that I wished him well. And it told him a little bit about my life at that point. He said goodbye, I said goodbye, and I walked downstairs and sat in the car for I don't know how long. And I was overwhelmed, and I wasn't overwhelmed like I want to go 100 miles an hour down the freeway. And I wasn't overwhelmed like I want to go punch something, or I wasn't overwhelmed crying. I was actually overwhelmed because I was at peace. And I thought, what's going on here? Am I like disassociating myself from myself? Do I need to see a therapist? What's going on in this moment? And I heard in one of those really clear moments where I hear God speak to me, those moments in life where you can kind of put a pinpoint on it. You say, this was really the Lord. And I heard him say, your father was not with you when you were born. He was not there for you today. And he probably won't be there for you in the future. But on the day you were born, I was there with you. I was your father. Today, I'm here with you, and I am your father. And as we move into the future, I will be there with you. I am your father. Thanks.
Thought I was ready until they went. I have come to know God to be the God of the great exchange. 7 months ago, my life changed forever. Concepts such as certainty, stability, consistency, always, and absolute have taken on a whole new meaning in my life. March the 29th, 2013. Some call it Good Friday. I guess it was a Good Friday. I was sitting at the dining room table in my house, eating a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, minding my own business. Good Friday morning, until I get a phone call from my mother. And you know, sometimes I get phone calls from my mom and I ignore those calls because I'm not quite ready to take them. But something told me to pick up the phone on Friday, March the 29th. And when I picked up the phone, all I heard from my mom was, Lily, I tried to resuscitate your dad. And in my mind, I know that the words tried means unsuccessful. And so for about 30 to 45 seconds, I freaked out. I went into anxiety, and all I could say over and over and over to my mom was, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Because my mom had just said to me, I tried to resuscitate your dad. And that is all she could say. But I knew that at 26 years old, tried meant unsuccessful. And in that moment of anxiety, I didn't know what to do. I fell on the ground. I flipped out, I freaked out, and I'm on the phone with my mom, and all I could say is, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? And immediately, God brought back a memory to my mind. Immediately, the God of the great exchange took me from anxiety to peace in about 30 to 45 seconds. And he gave me a vision of literally 2 days prior, I was sitting in that exact same seat in my dining room, and I saw a picture of myself eulogizing my father, and I had no idea what that meant. I thought I was tripping. Like, who just sits at the dining room table and sees themselves performing their own dad's funeral? And I thought literally that I had tripped out. I had freaked out. I'm like, what am I thinking about? This is crazy. That was Wednesday. Friday morning, my mom calls me and tells me, I tried to resuscitate your dad. And in that moment, a sense of peace came over me, and I moved from anxiety and fear and worry to peace. It was because in that moment, I remember sitting in a meeting at work, and a woman was telling a story, and in that story, she said, God is already in my tomorrow, anticipating my arrival. And in that moment, it sounded good, so it was a nice quote that I wrote down in my quote book, and I figured, I would use someday later in life. I had no idea that quote, that God is already in my tomorrow, anticipating my arrival, I would have to apply to losing my dad at 26 years old. But in the moment that my mom called me and told me that my dad died, God brought back a vision to me of me eulogizing my father. And that was God's way of showing me that he was already 2 days ahead of me. He was already 3 months ahead of me. He was 7 months ahead of me. And even now, he's 5 years ahead of me, and he's 10 years ahead of me. But in 30 seconds, the Holy Spirit did in me what he needed to do to remind me that God is already in my arrival, God is already in my tomorrow, anticipating my arrival. And as I stand here before you guys and talk to you about losing my dad, please don't be confused. It has been the worst 7 months of my life. It has been the most difficult. It has been the most painful. It has been the most confusing 7 months of my life. But I am confident, and I have a peace in knowing that if God can show me 2 days prior to my dad's death that I will be eulogizing my father, that he can take care of the rest of my life. And so I leave you guys with this. It was funny, I was sitting here getting ready to come up here with my notes on my iPad, and my iPad breaks down. I'm like, oh my gosh, and I text messaged my brother, and I said, Alan, I'm freaking out. My notes, what am I gonna do? And he said, God is Emmanuel, he's with you, Liana. And I think about the fact that we always say God is Emmanuel and Jesus is with us. But what God has reminded me is not only am I with you, Liana, but I'm already in your tomorrow, anticipating your arrival.
Thank you. A little over a year ago, I was coming onto campus for my junior year and early for SOS. I was an SOS leader. I was driving onto campus with my mom. I was in the passenger seat, and we were driving into the Lee parking lot. And I can remember saying to her, I was like, Mom, I am so excited for this year. I feel so blessed by everything that God has put in my life, and I'm so happy that I'm terrified something bad is gonna happen. And literally 3 hours later, that anxiety became a reality. After we had moved, my parents and I had moved everything into the apartment, we were all settled in, I went and looked at my computer and I had an email that said, from financial aid, that said that they were taking away the majority of my financial aid. I, at first, thought this must be a huge mistake. How could I not see this coming? How come I didn't prevent this from happening? I was frustrated with myself. I was shocked. And I just knew in the pit of my stomach that this was going to be pretty tragic news for my family. Because like many people here, we've been struggling financially the last several years. My dad was out of work for 2.5 years, and it was by the grace of God that I was here in the first place, and we were just hanging on by a thread. So we knew that this was not good news. And so with school starting in 1 week, and I still had all these SOS obligations to fulfill, my family's in a scramble to find this money somehow and keep me here. And through all that, I was so thankful to have had all these different people by my side. Even though I felt like God kind of wasn't listening to me, I had all these friends and faculty praying over me. That entire SOS staff prayed for my family. Dr. Malloy prayed for me on the first day of class, the first day I met her. My coach Eddie and Dr. Muehlhoff wrote letters on my behalf to keep me here, which was such an honor. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the scholarship back, but I was able to get a little bit of money back, which was such a blessing, but it was still an unreachable amount for me to stay here. And so I was starting to accept that this wasn't what God wanted for me, and this isn't where I was supposed to be, even though I was sure of it before. I just was starting to accept that I was going to have to let go of my friends, let go of SOS, let go of the swim team, let go of pretty much the school that changed my life, and just starting to accept that. After months of no answers, and really starting to be okay with the fact that this was how it was going to be, I drove home for Thanksgiving break, which was up in Northern California, if you guys are from there. It's about a 6-hour drive. And that was the first time I'd been home since I found out about the news, first time I saw my parents, and I walked in the door, and first thing I see is my mom is in tears. And I froze, and I was like, okay, is there gonna be more bad news? And I just asked her, I said, Mom, what's wrong? And she said, Amber, I just was with Maureen and Dave, and they heard how bad we were struggling financially, and they want to pay for the rest of your year here so that you can stay where you belong. And needless to, I just started crying just right there. Didn't even have my bags on the floor. I was just bawling. And I was floored. I was completely floored. I had never been so affirmed of God's love before in my entire life, where it was so clear that this is where He wanted me. And all the people that He put in my life to bless me, it gives me chills. And I recognize that there's probably 100 stories here of people who are going through something similar or worse, or maybe they didn't have a happy ending, or maybe you're going through it right now. But I just encourage you to remember that God is with you even when you're not hearing Him. And, just He is there with you. And Biola is so precious to me, and I have not taken a day for granted since then. And, He was with me when I was crying and when I was rejoicing, and He was with financial aid when they had to send that letter. And even though what I thought was going to be the greatest year of my life ended up being the most challenging, God was with me. Thank you.
So what I was doing was crazy, and I knew it was crazy. I had a full-time job, I was married, I had small kids, and I was trying to eke out a master's and a PhD. I remember one time sitting at the dinner table working on a paper, and my kids were working on their homework, and one of my kids looked at my wife, Noreen, and said, "What grade is Dad in?" And my wife said, 22nd grade. How pathetic was that? So I finally got it done, and now I'm at Biola. I'm going on my 9th year at Biola. So what has stayed with me? Was there one class from all my masters, from all my PhD that just stayed with me? And there's a class I've thought about ever since leaving UNC Chapel Hill. You ever take a class you didn't know what it was? One of the rock stars at UNC Chapel Hill was a man named Michael Eric Dyson. He was leaving UNC Chapel Hill. Nobody knew that. And Dr. Madison grabbed me one day and said, "Hey, if you've never had Dyson, you need to take him next semester because he's leaving and you don't want to have a UNC experience without taking Dr. Dyson." So I signed up for the class. Didn't even know what it was. I show up for the very first day of class. Dr. Dyson gets up and he says, "Gangster rap music is a resistance movement. We ought not to censor it. We should listen to it. So let's listen to it." And he hit play, and I sat there for an hour and a half. I didn't know who Tupac was. I didn't know who 2 Live Crew was. I didn't know any of that. I'm sitting there listening to this music dressed like a Gap representative, right? I promise you, in an hour and a half, I promise you, I heard the F word 1,000 times. It was unbelievable. I never even knew that world existed. So here I am, driving home in my Hyundai, and I call my friend Tim Downs, and I say, "Well, I gotta drop the class. Obviously, I have to drop the class. There's no way I can sit and listen to that kind of stuff week after week." And Tim Downs said something to me, my friend. He said, "Listen, you just told me that this guy has been labeled one of the top African-American intellectuals in the entire country. You told me that he was a Southern Baptist minister, right? You told me that he's a really smart guy. Do you know why he defends gangster rap music?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'd give it one more week. Give it one more week to find out why a man who claims to be a Christian, is obviously very smart, PhD from Princeton, why does he defend gangster rap music?" And week after week, I thought, okay, this would be the week I drop the class. This would be the week I drop the class. And he challenged me so much. He said this: "What if you're living in the American nightmare? Not the American dream, but the American nightmare. Your kids don't play Little League because they don't have money for that. Your kids aren't going to ballet school. They're not doing Taekwondo because there is no money. They are literally living week to week. So if you're in the American nightmare, how do you get the attention of the dominant culture? How do you get people to listen to something that they don't want to hear? How do you get people to see something that they'd rather not see? Right? Write an academic article, nobody will read it, about poverty. Write an article in USA Today, well, nobody will publish it. But write a song called Cop Killer, where a racist LAPD police officer pulls you over, and instead of just capitulating, you take a gun out and shoot that officer. Now you're on the cover of Time magazine. Now everybody wants to interview you, and you get to talk about the poverty that you grew up in." I didn't know what to say to that. One day, 3 of us were supposed to present, 3 PhDs. Each of us was to have an hour. I was first. I was the only one who went that entire 3 hours. He was mad at me. He was saying, "You Christians don't care about anything." And I said, "Wow, it's hard to have all of Christianity on my shoulders." And he said, "It's never easy to get crucified, is it?" And I just sat there and listened and listened and listened. And I don't know what to do with it. I don't agree with everything he said. I don't agree with the method by which he says it. But I must say one thing. I still remember what he said. To this day, I think about Michael Eric Dyson. I think about what he said to me. I think about how he challenged me. You know, the greatest compliment I think you can have as a teacher is every once in a while, people will graduate and come back. And they'll say something to me like, "Dr. Muehlhoff, you said something in family communication like 5 years ago that I'm not sure I agree with it." And I'm like, you remember something I said 5 years ago? "Yeah, but I don't agree with it." I don't care. How about a hug? Come here. I don't know if I agree with Michael Eric Dyson. I don't know if I like Michael Eric Dyson. I don't know if I was manipulated by Michael Eric Dyson, but the one thing that is true about Michael Eric Dyson is he stays with me and reminds me every once in a while that there is an American nightmare that we need to think about and we need to respond to. And for that, I'm grateful.
Well, the concept of sabbatical comes from Leviticus 25. And in that, you hear about rest, resting in the Lord, Sabbath rest, ceasing your work. Here at Biola, professors can apply about every 7th year for a sabbatical. I like that part where it's ceasing your work. Thought, this is a screaming deal. I'm going to apply to be off work for a semester. So I decided I want to go back to Europe. I used to live in Europe. I was a missionary there. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a semester off work? But there's something in that when you're doing nothing, God is still always doing something. You can't really do nothing if you want to be with God. And so going on sabbatical, I thought, I want to study a little bit about how Christianity migrated, let's say, across Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula in Spain all the way to the Emerald Isle. And I was very blessed. I got to do just that. We were working on a retreat center similar to Hilltop, if you're familiar with that, an Institute of Spiritual Formation. Those two pieces alone changed my life right here at Biola. And getting to know Judy Tenelsoff, who started the sabbatical with me. And when we traveled around Spain a bit to see the beginnings of Christianity, a number of kind of bad things happened. A car wreck, getting things stolen, and yet God was with us, and He showed up in miraculous ways, even giving me Spanish language that I never spoke before in order to work through these situations. And I enjoyed the peace, the quiet, being with the missionaries, with the Spaniards, with those in Spain, in Ireland and England and Scotland that were engaging in spiritual retreat. So I had a plan, and God was with me. And He was with me through the body of Christ. And He was with me in the intimacy and the silence that I was able to experience in a whole new way. But then fast forward 7 years later to this past spring, and when I was due for another sabbatical, but hadn't planned to go anywhere. God had another plan. In the middle of the semester, some unusual physical things happened, and I needed to go to the doctor. And after a series of test, after MRI, after ultrasound and biopsies, I got a call. You have cancer. And it's already been spoken of, but the peace of God was with me. And I remember standing in my office here by myself saying, is this how I'm going to go to heaven? And I had the peace of God because He was with me. But I did go over to Judy Tenelsoff's office in ISF, and we prayed together. And within 2 days, I needed to make a plan with my dean and tell my students, and you students, a lot of you students were with me in that moment. When I talked to my classes, when I taught the lesson and then at the end of the class said, this is what's going on and I'll only be here these 2 days. Everything happened so fast. But the Lord was with me, and He was with me through this body at Biola, my church, my family, my friends. He is with us in the body of Christ. That's a whole different kind of sabbatical, a whole different kind of resting in Him. He continued to do miracles in my life in this sabbatical because I was supposed to have not serious, not stage 4 cancer. That was already assuaged in my mind that I would be fine, but I would go through reconstruction. I would have some major surgery. And as people prayed for me, I got a phone call after waiting. Sitting at home is a whole different kind of sabbatical, in the backyard, seeing fireflies that I don't usually see around my koi pond, and hummingbirds. And the same thing I had asked for in '06, waiting on the Lord, resting in Him, having that intimate relationship with Him. I had it in my own backyard because I had to wait. But God showed up, and He was with me. And I got a call after the first biopsy and the plans for a surgery that would require reconstruction. And they said, "You don't have that much cancer. We're not sure what happened." And I said, "I'm sure, because people have been praying." And even though I had a minor type of surgery, I did have 4 weeks of radiation. And even in that, God showed up. But I didn't have to have the reconstruction. He healed me, and He allowed me to go through the radiation so that I could be with people I would never be with otherwise, with people with not as good a diagnosis, chemo, possible death. And He was with me. And all the time when you think you're doing nothing and you're hanging out with God and you're waiting in a waiting room or in your backyard or in Ireland or Spain, when He's with us, we're never doing nothing. We're always doing something. He's always doing something.
So to prepare the soil, I had to get my hands a little dirty. Right? This is a story of me getting my hands kind of dirty. I met this guy named Joseph, and he, the first time I met him, he was wearing his usual costume, which is a white V-neck t-shirt and cut-off jean shorts. And he was just a riot, the most interesting guy. And I met him on the coast of the Mediterranean, down in Spain, when I was doing missions work, and he just kind of stumbled into our art gallery. And he was just super fascinating and so interested in American culture. He was in agriculture, but his real passion, it seemed, was American culture. He loved especially the show Pimp My Ride. And he did this, the first night I met him, he like pantomimed that television show, and he's just all about it, and it's great because I kind of love that show too. But Joseph was super into it, and he's a middle-aged man, so that's kind of weird, but in Spain. But another thing happened that first night that I met him. He and his buddy kind of went off into a corner of the patio, and they grabbed the cigarettes from behind their ears, unrolled it, grabbed a small baggie, and sprinkled a little green noxious herb into it, which I'm pretty sure was oregano, right? But then they lit it up and it didn't smell like oregano at all. And I was just like, okay, so these are the guys that I meant to be with on this missions trip. And every single time I hung out with them, they were smoking pot. And every single time I left, I smelled a little bit like I was smoking pot, even though every time I passed on that grass. And so Joseph and I were hanging out. He came over and taught me to make paella. He measured the rice out with his very own hands. He was just so used to making it. And we started making plans to get together and go out to his place in the countryside. And a few of us went into this tiny little car, 4 people and a dog, a white lab, constantly shedding. And we went out to this spring that was kind of a stop on the way out there. And we had to fill up some jugs with water to water the plants. And so I hopped out, and I was just like, oh great, we're gonna water the plants. Kind of waited in the spring, started filling the jugs, and then something kind of hit me. And it was super surprising, and I was just like, I wonder what kind of plants Joseph farms. And then I remembered that first night that I watched his little ritual of unrolling his cigarette and adding a little extra. He got a little seed out, and he was just so excited to show it to me, and he said, it's a baby. And I was just like, that's probably a language barrier thing, like maybe he doesn't know the word seed in English. But sure enough, he was growing marijuana, and I was helping him fill jugs of water to grow his marijuana plants while I'm on a missions trip, by the way. And yet I knew that these were the guys that I was supposed to spend my time with. It was so simple and so obvious to me that the Lord loved them so dearly, and in order for me to be with them, it meant going home smelling like marijuana a little bit. So we got out to his place. Sure enough, they went behind some bushes. I didn't follow them there. I didn't even want to see that there were marijuana plants there. In fact, maybe they weren't even marijuana plants. I will never know. It was just so crazy. And so I was just, the craziest thing happened next. They came back from behind the shrubs, and you know what we did? We just barbecued and ate. And it was that simple. That was daily life. And for me to be with him in his daily life, it meant being around him smoking pot, helping him fill jugs of water, and helping the most unassuming drug lord you'd ever know, and eating barbecue. So that's it.
So it's January 3rd this year, and I am sitting in a doctor's chair awaiting a medical procedure on the skin underneath my eyes. And the room is silent. If you can imagine, just white walls, white ceiling, white floor. Some medical equipment scattered around. And 10 minutes go by, 20, 30, no doctor. I'm just sitting there, and I'm just getting more anxious as time goes on. And then it dawns on me, why am I not asking God to join me in this? And to be honest, my personality, I tend to kind of be a bit independent, and it takes me a little while to ask God in sometimes. But anyway, I said, okay, God, please join me in this. I'm feeling quite alone. And as soon as I did that, I really, my nerves just calmed down a bit. And about 40 minutes after I'd been sitting there, the doctor shows up. He says, okay, we're going to put some numbing shots on the skin of your eyes, just to prepare you for the laser. We're going to do something, we just want to make sure you don't feel it too much. So I'm thinking one shot in each area is good. I hate shots. I'm fearful of doctors. I have been since I was a kid. Anybody else like that, by the way? Or am I the only one? Okay, good. And so, but no, he has a little different thing in mind. He starts the needle going, and it's just going in, and then he's moving along. I mean, he's making a little bit of a train track across my face, okay? And I'm just twitching my face and grimacing, and I'm feeling trapped. I'm feeling just really uncomfortable. And so all I can think of to say is, oh Lord, please just be here with me. Just join me so I don't feel like I'm doing this by myself. And about 20 shots later, no joke, he's done. And as soon as the anesthesia kind of kicks in, he says, okay, laser's coming on. It comes on, and it was like this. It was just, it was really loud. I don't know why, but I thought lasers were quiet. They're not. This was loud, and all of a sudden I felt something like dull nails pounding. Just pounding my skin, and my head is just pulsating, and I think my mouth is just kind of dropped, and I don't know if I'm drooling or what, and then I smell this really strange smell, and yeah, you probably know what it is. It's burning flesh is what it is, and as the laser moves closer to the center of my face where there isn't any anesthesia, then this dull nail turns into needle-like electricity that's jolting into my face, and I'm just literally feeling the raw force of laser just pummel me. And all I can do is just say, Lord, 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 please, just stay here with me, hang with me, because this is over the edge for me. And at that moment, it's as if he was saying to me, Mark, you can handle this. And actually, you can handle more than this with me. It's not that bad, and I love you. And really, I tell this story because it's an illustration of me just inviting God into areas that are fearful and anxiety-ridden for me, and some of them are historical, like they go back a long time. And so it's like a slow burn because it takes a long time to work through some of those things, for God to come and fill those places that there was fear and bring him into those spaces and to drive out that fear. And so, yeah, and when he does that, it's uncomfortable, it's time-consuming, but he really breaks through and takes over those places. Thanks.
Winter was almost over, and I really needed it to be. I won't go so far as to say it was also winter in my heart. It was. But I was definitely heartsick. I'd been living in Texas, working on my master's degree at this conservative Catholic graduate university. And in my spare time, I was trying to secure some longer-term work. The denim jumpers and handmade linen skirts I wore communicated, I think, quite effectively to my male colleagues, why, yes, I will homeschool our babies. The man who broke my heart that year wore Dockers, followed etiquette rules, studied literature, and prayed with the dying. Unfortunately, though I had prayed faithfully about our relationship, loved what was good and godly in him, practiced all the wisdom I possessed, and longed for good and godly things for myself, here I was at the end of winter, very much alone. I was sad and I was confused, but I wanted to be well and I wanted to know God in this, and I needed some sort of sign that all of my hopes weren't going to be radically disappointed always. So, as winter turned to spring, I decided to plant a garden. And not just to take my mind off the heartache. This garden was a practice in hope. This garden was a chance to see dead-seeming things come to life. This garden was a prayer. I was living in an apartment complex, so no yard, just a patio. A container garden would have to suffice. I started small, 5 or 6 terracotta pots, varying sizes. I can't remember everything I planted, but I know there was a red rose bush in one, the largest container, Gerber daisies, because my roommate liked those, tomatoes, because I thought I should try to like them, and a geranium in a basket to hang from the patio roof. I planted everything carefully and watched and watered faithfully, but every plant was painfully slow to grow. There were probably 4 roses that bloomed that entire spring. The only exception to my nearly sterile garden was this geranium, vibrant and florid. This red viney thing was visible from our living room window. So despite my gardening failures, when friends would come over, they'd look out the window and say, "Oh, you have a garden, pretty." And I'd think, barely. One day when I was climbing on a chair to water the hanging plant, I noticed what seemed to be the beginnings of a bird's nest in the basket. Now, I'm no bird expert, but I figured that a wet nest isn't a likely bird home. So, even though, or perhaps because this was the only plant of mine that bloomed, I knew what I needed to do. I would let the geranium die so that the bird would live. Here was the answer to my prayer. This was going to be my sign. Sure enough, as I predicted, when I stopped watering the geranium, it started to die, and the bird continued to build its home. So within a few weeks, there were 3, there were 4 in the picture, but there were 3 eggs in this precious nest. I was expecting baby birds, and my friends were expecting them with me. I remember running into my friend Annie out front of the university library. Annie was this precious homeschooled Catholic gal from Kentucky. She could recite the Lady of Shalott in all sincerity. She was wearing a peasant blouse and a gingham skirt, and after confessing to me, "Melissa, I'm so embarrassed. I just lit my bangs on fire trying to light my cigarette," she said, She asked me, "Have your baby birds hatched?" They did hatch. Tiny, squeaky, vulnerable sparrows. And I would sneak out to the porch to peek into that nest, even though it made that mama bird mad. She'd perch on the railing, chirping something awful. Those birds must not have been 2 weeks old when I woke one morning after a rainstorm to the sound of that mama bird squawking. I went out to the porch because I knew something was wrong. The storm had been strong, and the basket was not sufficient shelter. 2 of the birds were flooded out and lay smashed on the concrete, and the 3rd was cold and dead in the nest. There's not much more plot to my story. I buried those baby birds, and I felt with terrible force God's refusal to prove himself to me on my terms. Later that afternoon, I read a line from Hamlet. "We defy augury," Hamlet says. "There's special providence in the fall of a sparrow." Augury's the ancient pagan art of
looking for signs from God by interpreting the movement of birds. And Hamlet says, no, the only thing we know is that God was with that sparrow while it fell. And here, 12 years later, since I never received a sign, I don't know much about how to interpret my story for you, but I know that God was with me as I buried those baby birds.
I think I'll work this side of the room. You guys have been neglected over here, right? I'm still getting over growing marijuana on a missions trip. Sitting there going through the contract and the doctrinal statement, okay, no dancing, modest dress, nothing about growing marijuana on a missions trip. I think we're okay. By the way, if you stay throughout my talk, you get triple chapel credits tonight, so. Thank you. I grew up in Moline, Illinois, a small town on the Mississippi River. It's the home of John Deere tractors. That was our claim to fame. And I went to Garfield Grammar School, and every day, Monday through Friday, I ran home to have lunch with my mom. Soup and sandwich while we listened to the Aunt Teresa Story Hour on WDLM radio, broadcasting out of Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I loved that show. Every day, ran home, flipped on the transistor, and it started with a little boy saying, "Aunt Teresa, tell me a story." And for the next hour, Aunt Teresa would take me into this amazing place with characters, storyline, all these images, and I would just get lost in that story. And then suddenly it was 1 o'clock, I kind of came to and had to go back to school. I look forward to that hour every single day. It was just this wonderland that Aunt Teresa took me into. And one day, November 22nd, 1963, I was listening to the story, and my mom had gone into the living room doing something, and about 12:15, I heard this voice come on the radio. It says, "We interrupt the Aunt Teresa Story Hour with a news bulletin from Dallas, Texas. President Kennedy has been shot, and he's been taken to Parkland Hospital. We'll bring you further news when it becomes available. We now return you to the Aunt Teresa Story Hour." And I'm sitting there as a third grader thinking, well, what was that about? First of all, why would anyone want to shoot the president? And my mom walked back in the kitchen right then, and she looked at me and wondered what happened. I said, well, somebody just shot the president. And she had the same look on her face. We couldn't quite believe what was going on. But I knew at that moment I had to run and tell somebody. This is like the start of the broadcaster in me. I had to go tell somebody about this event. So I got up, I think we shook hands. We weren't a real emotional family, we're Swedish. I said, "Thank you for the soup and sandwich, Mom." I'm going back to the school. And I ran back to the playground, started yelling to anybody in particular, "The president's been shot, the president's been shot." It was my first broadcast lead, and I don't think I could improve on it today. That said it all, the president's been shot. And all these other kids came running up to me, "Don't you lie, don't lie like that, that's not true, don't you be telling lies." I said, "No, it's true, I just heard it on the Aunt Teresa Story Hour." And Principal Bandel, he was our principal, big guy, huge hands with these hairy knuckles. And he used to have this paddle, he called it the Little Stinger. Are you familiar with the Little Stinger? And he drilled holes in the paddle so the wind would go through it so he could hit us on the tixer harder. The tixer is this. And I did feel the little stinger on a couple of occasions, okay? So he grabbed me by the collar, pulled me into his office, and said, "Don't you be telling stories like that. That's not true." I said, "It is. I just heard it on the Aunt Teresa Story Hour." He said, "No, that's not true." And he actually put me in his closet and shut the door. I was in there for 15 minutes while he found out that, in fact, it was true that President Kennedy had been shot and, in fact, killed. And then he came out and announced it to the rest of the school. I learned on that day the power of a good story, and also you can get locked up for telling a story. 30 years later, almost to the day, I was doing an interactive local morning show at WIFR TV in Rockford, Illinois. And this is after I was a lawyer. My students know I've had a couple different lives. But anyway, I was doing this interactive morning show, and as part of my give back to the community, I would go out to nursing homes and rest homes and read a story every Tuesday night. So this one particular evening, I was at the Fairview Nursing Home, and I was reading a story to about the 25 residents there, 20 or 30. And afterwards, I got up and walked around, and I just talked to each one of them, kind of get to know them. And I saw this elderly woman in the back of the room. So I thought, well, I got to bring her into this. So I walked to the back. I said, "Hi, my name's Stu. Did you enjoy the story?" And she said, "Well, yes, I did, very much." She said, "I used to do that. I used to tell stories on the radio." And I felt this sensation, kind of like a wind around me, and I didn't even have to ask. But I said, "What's your name?" And she said, "It's Teresa." And I said, "Aunt Teresa." And she said, "Yes." I said, "Aunt Teresa, it's because of you that I'm here tonight. Telling this story." And she said, "Well, that's very nice." And we just kind of looked at each other. There was nothing to say. Sometimes you don't have to say anything in a story. You know, I hear the word random thrown around a lot today. I got this random text. I got this random email. I'm eating some random sandwich. Look at it, it's just random. I was at the ATM the other day. A woman said, "I got these random 50s out of here. Look at this." I said, "I'll take some of those random 50s. But you know, none of this is random. It's not random that I'm standing here right now with you guys. It certainly wasn't random that I was listening to the Aunt Teresa Story Hour on November 22nd, 1963. And I know it wasn't random when 30 years later, I ran into her in the back of the Fairview Nursing Home. I also know it wasn't random that 4 years ago, for whatever reason, I went on the internet and there's an ad for a Biola broadcast instructor. I wasn't looking for that. I didn't set out to do that. I never had teaching as a goal. I was doing travel programming for Spike TV. I'm down in the Baja, minding my own business, and there it is. And so now I'm teaching the next generation of storytellers. And I think about that every time a new prospective student walks into Studio B with their parents. And it happened just on Saturday once again. And I heard a voice, and it said, "Aunt Teresa, tell me a story." It's all very beautiful. Thank you.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.